real parents, real stories. It's the Meet the Parents podcast.
Welcome to another edition of the Meet the Parents podcast, with more conversation from some of the UK's top parent bloggers. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham, and I'm joined today by Vicky from Verily Victoria Vocalisers. Good evening.
Hello there, Tim.
So on this episode, we're going to have a chat about the subject of bucket lists and how I recently ticked off another item on mine. Now, you're probably already familiar with the concept of a bucket list, but if you're not familiar with the term, it's essentially a list of things to do before you die, and it comes from the slang term for dying, kicking the bucket. So, Vicky, do you have a bucket list?
Do you know what? I actually don't. I've never actually made one, but I think I've sort of got one in my head. So, yeah, I like to make it up as I go along.
So, is it something you've ever thought of actually formally writing down, and have you got any idea then of the kind of things that are in your head that you might put on it?
I've thought a couple of times of writing one down. And then I thought, well, the trouble is if I start writing one, it might actually never stop, which is fair enough. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I just don't think I've ever got round to it, because as soon as I've sort of thought of something, I've ticked it off, if you like. So, yeah, there's still quite a few things I'd like to do, and still there's quite a few things I have done, which I'm happy that I've ticked off, and that's it, you know.
So what sort of things are we talking about here?
From when I was 15, I was adamant that I would meet Go West, the pop group. And I have now probably 5 times. The time that really counted was the year I was having a really difficult time, and I just won a court case that I had to put together myself. The chance presented itself at a ladies' lunch in Denby's, which was in Dorking. Yeah, met the chaps there, and then after that sort of kept bumping into each other. So that's one of the things I've ticked off. I've still like to go to see the Grand Canyon. That's one of my big goals. I'd love to go there and actually take a helicopter ride over it.
Oh yes, now we've done that. We've taken the helicopter ride that takes you down below the rim, and believe me, you get a completely different perspective and sense of scale on things when you're actually lowering yourself down into the canyon than when you're peering over the top of it.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's definitely one on my list. And I'd also like to go to New Zealand. Mainly mine are based around travel, really. And of course, there's that second child that is still on my list.
Yes, of course, as we've talked about before, and will no doubt do so again. You know, interestingly, I don't have a formal bucket list of my own as such, but I am increasingly finding in recent years that I'm doing things or having experiences that I look back at retrospectively and think, yeah, you know, that would have been on the bucket list. And I think, actually, again, quite similar to you, one of the things that's put me off is knowing where to start with such a list, and then actually knowing when to stop once you've started it. And if you're at all like that, I would thoroughly recommend visiting bucketlist.org, which is a bit like the world's biggest Pinterest board of ideas for inspiration. Now, the site has 400,000 members chasing over 5 million goals, and you can list them in order of popularity. So when I looked the other day, the things you do on a Sunday night, the top 10 most popular items added by people were seeing the Northern Lights, swimming with dolphins, learning a new language, going on a cruise, getting a tattoo, going skydiving, bungee jumping, visiting a volcano, getting married, and visiting Niagara Falls. So actually, like you were saying, Vicky, a lot of them are travel related. Now, I've done 3 of those top 10, so I've learnt a language several times over and forgotten virtually all of them again, other than the ability to order 2 beers in 5 different languages. I've also visited a volcano, which we did in New Zealand, which you just mentioned was on your list, and getting married. And there's 2 others, I would say, in that top 10 that I would definitely like to do. Very much like to see the Northern Lights and Niagara. So again, kind of travel-based ones. But Vicky, how about you? How many of the top 10 have you done, and how many would you like to do?
It's an interesting list, actually. Yes, I'd definitely like to see the Northern Lights. That would be on there. Swimming with dolphins. Yeah, okay. I mean, I've touched a dolphin, so I'm happy with that. Thanks. They feel like lilos, by the way. So yeah, that's fine. I'm happy with that. I'm not so bothered about swimming with them. Learning a new language. Well, I've tried that several times. I did learn French at school, and I've still got it up there a bit. I could order things like you, but that's probably about my limit. Go on a cruise, yes, I'd love to. And so would Ross, so that's definitely there. Visit a volcano, yes. Get married, well, I did that, but I'd like to do it again properly to the right person. And yeah, I did Niagara Falls quite a few years ago, actually. And we went in the Maid of the Mist and went underneath, and it was fantastic. You get soaked, but it was a real experience. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed that one.
In truth, I think a lot of the top 10, it's quite a varied list, but a lot of them are, they're almost a bit bland, or at least so common that, I would personally question whether you would actually put them on something as ambitious as a bucket list. When you dip below the top 10, you soon come across some more interesting and esoteric entries. So just to highlight a few that caught my eye, there was throwing a dart at a map and travelling to wherever it lands, and there's also a number of similar ones like going to an airport and taking a random flight, sending a message in a bottle, writing yourself a letter, sealing it and reading it 10 years later, experiencing zero gravity, taking part in a flash mob, and one that was really popular that just made me chuckle was covering a car in post-it notes.
What? That's really random.
Which was suitably bizarre, and of those, I think the idea of travelling to a random destination particularly appeals to me, and I'm sure it does to a lot of other people as well. I mean, it's not that there aren't plenty of places that aren't already on my travel wish list, but the idea of going somewhere completely random and different that you haven't necessarily been planning out for years in advance does appeal. As long as I don't end up in the middle of a war zone, that is, in which case I might have to demand a second go if that happens.
Off you go to Iraq then.
But any of those take your fancy?
Yeah, they do actually. I like the idea of just having somewhere random to go, like you, as long as it's not somewhere dangerous. And yeah, I think I've already done the letter thing. I haven't sealed it, but I have read them like years later because I used to write stuff to myself. I used to write sort of diaries. So I suppose that's similar in a way. Zero gravity, yeah, I'd like to do that. That'd be pretty cool as long as I don't find myself being ill. And taking part in a flash mob, yeah, that would be pretty cool actually.
So if you had to write down 3 things to add to your hypothetical bucket list today, is there anything else than what we've already discussed that you might want to add?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'd absolutely love to go on a safari. I love, in case you hadn't noticed, I love taking pictures of nature and animals, and it would just be an absolute amazing thing to do, as long as it's in comfort. I'm not really a great big lover of camping, so as long as they gave me all my necessities, bathroom and bed wise, I'd be happy. Yeah, I'd like to go and see a load of film sets as well, like New Zealand and The Hobbit, and where Tatooine was filmed in, I think it's Tunisia. And I'd love to go to Hollywood. I really want to go there, and it would be a fantastic thing to have your handprints done in the concrete, but I don't think I'll ever, that's never going to happen. So yeah, that probably will stay on my bucket list forever and never go. And I'd love to go to New York. So again, it's all travel related. I'd love to go to New York and tour there. I've never been, and go to Broadway and see a show and that type of thing.
Yeah, and of course you've recently done Northern Ireland, haven't you, where you saw a lot of the locations from Game of Thrones.
Yes, definitely. And I have to say it was fantastic. And you're looking out at things and you're going, oh yeah, I recognise that and I recognise that. And it's just a really good experience. So I think it's a new vocation for me, going to a film set.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, because I'm always really fascinated by that kind of thing as well. And when we were in New Zealand, actually the volcano that we walked up to is at the foot of Mount Narahoe, which is Mount Doom in the Lord of the Rings films.
Cool.
But there were no hobbits around. I was most disappointed, and yeah, and similarly, actually having been to both LA and to New York, it's really interesting walking around locations that seem really familiar to you from films and from TV programs, and to actually experience them in the flesh is quite something. Particularly New York, you know the number of times you've seen Times Square or you know, the Rockefeller Center or the Empire State Building or the Chrysler Building or Grand Central Station. You know, those are kind of iconic locations that are so familiar to us, even if we've never actually seen them live.
Yeah, I mean, I've done San Francisco and been on the Golden Gate Bridge. So, you know, when you see that in films now, or when I see it, I recently saw it in Planet of the Apes, it's just like, that's just bizarre, because I've been on there and it's just, you know, it's quite something to feel like you've been somewhere and then see it on a film and stuff.
Yeah, and you know, in terms of things that I might add, you know, I really like the idea of writing a letter to myself to be read 10 years in the future, and it's struck me as being something that I'd be really keen on encouraging our children to do at some point as well. That'd be a really interesting exercise for them, I think. Now, finally, let's move on from us and think about our children. So, what about if you had to sit down with Grace and write a bucket list for her or with her? And do you have any idea what she might put on it?
Yeah, that's interesting, actually, because one of the things, because I had a chat with her earlier on about this, and I sort of said to her, like, you know, what would you put on your bucket list? And of course, she wanted to know what a bucket list was, first of all. So I explained that to her, and she said, oh, I'd like to jump out of a plane, Mum. I said, what else? And she said, I'd like to see the Statue of Liberty, which I thought was pretty cool. And she said she wanted to see the Eiffel Tower. So again, look, you see, it's travel stuff. And she said she'd like to become famous for playing the piano. Now, this is one thing that I missed off my stuff earlier on, is to learn a musical instrument. I should have done it when I was younger. And now trying to sort of keep up the momentum of practicing and learning. That's the thing. I mean, she said she wants to become famous for playing piano, and she writes songs herself as well at the moment. So I'd like to encourage that in her. Let's make sure she carries on doing it so she does know that she can fully play, you know, properly, Gary Barlow style. So yeah, no, I'd definitely encourage that in her. And I think I just want to make sure that she saw the world but didn't give up on other things either. You know, learn a language properly, get married to the right person, and just experience as many things in her life and make it a rich, fulfilled one rather than I've done nothing with it one.
It's funny, we were talking with Hannah on last week's podcast, and skydiving was a present that was given to her for her 18th birthday, so maybe that's something for Grace in the future. Now, you're one step ahead of me because I haven't had the same conversation with any of the kids yet, but I've been thinking about it a lot actually over the course of today, and it's definitely an exercise that I'd really like to do with them individually, you know, maybe every couple of years or so, because I think it's a really interesting way of charting, you know, how their horizons expand and how their hopes and aspirations evolve over time. Now, there's an idea for a series of blog posts if ever I had one.
Yeah.
In Toby's case, I can imagine him wanting to indulge his current passions and have, you know, probably something related to the London Underground or about visiting famous landmarks. So the Eiffel Tower would absolutely be at the top of his list. And we're going to France this summer and spending a couple of days in Paris on the way down to the Alps. So hopefully we'll be able to tick the Eiffel Tower off his list this summer, which would be really cool. And that's it for our discussion about our family's bucket lists. Best we get cracking on those, I think. Never mind swimming with dolphins or trekking the Inca Trail. The new bestseller, The Parent's Bucket List, spells out the 1001 things you really need to do before your kids grow up. From having a Sunday morning lie-in to getting through an entire week without stepping on a stray Lego brick. These are the goals that every parent of a young child should truly aspire to. Pre-order your copy now. Not available in bookshops or online retailers, or indeed anywhere. If you follow me on social media or read my blog, you'll probably be aware that I appeared on the radio a couple of weeks ago. I may have mentioned it 100 or 300 times on social media. Okay, it was only BBC Radio Berkshire, so it meant I was only heard by 3 people, 2 screaming infants and a dog, but this was still the first time I've appeared on radio, so it was a big deal to me. I was brought in to talk about being a male parenting blogger in a world dominated by mums. And actually, it was a lot of fun, despite me having to force myself to step inside the building and not run away beforehand to throw up in the bushes. We chatted for about 15 minutes. I didn't suffer catastrophic brain freeze at any point. And despite having carefully prepared pages and pages of written notes, I only ended up glancing at them once or twice. And it was only afterwards that I reflected on the fact that if I had had a bucket list, appearing live on radio or TV would probably have been on it. I'm far from the first blogger to appear on radio or TV. Emma from Island Living 365, who guested on the podcast 2 weeks ago, has been on BBC Radio Jersey no fewer than 3 times. And Vicky, you've done radio before too, haven't you?
I have. I've done it a few times now. I think I'm one of LBC's go-to bloggers when they want to talk about to talk to a parent about obviously parenting related issues. So yeah, I've spoken about things like, should smacking be legal, illegal? Is it right to holiday without your kids? Pocket money. We spoke about that a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And child abuse, actually, and whether or not we should be more vigilant. So quite some tricky subjects.
Yeah. Can you remember what it was like the first time you were on, and yeah, how different is it now that you've got a few of these experiences under your belt?
I just try and make sure that, because they usually give you the subject in advance if you're talking about something specific. So I try and make sure I've done a bit of research and I know my own mind. I've been lucky enough to do quite a lot of acting anyway in the past. So I'm not too bad when it comes to actually speaking to people. I've done radio in the past. I've done, actually, the very first time I was on radio was LBC years ago when I was at the London College of Fashion, and they had the Savile Row Centenary taking place, and a few of the models from the London College of Fashion were dressed up in costume, and they decided to come around and interview us, and one of them was me, and I was a bit put on the spot. Of course, Martin Lewis on one side, Selena Scott's on the other, and I'm like, ugh. But it was fine. So I sort of, ever since then, because I was put on the spot that time, I've always tried to make sure that when I do speak, I know my mind, and I'm sort of anticipating the sort of questions they might ask me, and try not to get too tangled up with any answers.
I guess the final thing actually is just to enjoy it, isn't it? It's an experience that you may only have once or twice, and it's one that not everyone in life will have. So I guess you kind of have to make the most of it for what it is, don't you?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, it goes so quickly as well. And radio is a bit like newspaper. You've done it and it's gone, and that's it.
So anyway, having talked about it, here's the recording of my debut appearance on the radio. Now, it's pretty obvious from it that I'm not going to be the next Evans or Moyles, but I was quite pleased with the end result, despite my nerves. So Vicky and I will be back to wrap up in about 15 minutes. Enjoy.
Sarah Walker with you this afternoon, Bill Buckley on the way from One. Now, we often meet mums who write about their experience of parenting in the form of online blogs, which seem to have soared in popularity in the last 5 or 6 years. We very rarely talk to dads who do that, but a father of 3 from Thatcham is kind of bucking that trend with his online parenting blog. His name's Tim Liu. He joins me in the studio now. So how long have you been blogging for? Because, as I said, this is the whole parenting blogging thing seems to have risen in popularity in the last 5 years or so. Did you start back then or earlier, or did you come to it later?
No, actually, a bit earlier than that.
Okay.
So I started blogging back in 2007,
Yeah.
and at various times since then, I've had a total of 7 different blogs, but I've been focusing on the parenting side for the last 3 or 4 years.
Now, I mentioned that you've got 3 children. How old are they?
They're 8 and 6
Yeah.
and 4. So the 2 oldest are boys and the youngest is a girl.
Okay, so when you first came to blogging, you had, what, a 1-year-old, or he was in his infancy, wasn't
Yeah,
he?
that's right. I'd started just a few months after Isaac was born,
Okay.
and it's kind of snowballed from there.
Now, why did you start it?
Well, it's one of those things, I think. I've never had any kind of formal training as a
Yep.
writer or a journalist or anything like that, but I've had this kind of itch, this urge to write ever since I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And normally I am the shyest, quietest, most introverted person in any room. I'm the person who wouldn't say boo to the proverbial goose.
Yeah.
But I'm much more comfortable writing than talking, and the blog's given me a voice, which it helps me process my own thinking, and it allows me to share the ups and downs of being a dad and capture all those little moments of having a growing family that that otherwise just whiz by in a flash, don't they?
It's such a good point, that whole thing about it. It helps you to process your own thinking. It does. It helps you to make sense of the constant ups and downs of being a parent, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And so often parenting makes very little sense at the time.
Exactly. And you almost always feel as though you're doing it wrong as well. It's somehow every day you're making another parenting blunder, really.
Absolutely. And one of the great things about blogs is you're part of this wider community where you're sharing your stories, they're sharing their stories, and actually you realise that you're not alone.
Yeah.
You're all in the same boat. Everyone's struggling. Nobody has this perfect image or this perfect life that sometimes you see portrayed on social media, and the reality, as we know, is completely different.
Of course it is. And why focus on parenting, though, as the subject matter for your blog?
I think with 3 kids, they provide a lot of material anyway.
That's not,
and it's an opportunity for me, as I said, to process my thoughts, but also it allows me to capture all those little moments. I guess it's a little bit like keeping a diary.
Yeah.
But it's you're writing about them, you're capturing photos about them, you're having people that comment on them as well. So it's a great way of capturing those early years of life that do go by in a blur.
Yeah, and it's interesting because certainly in the last few years we've seen a rise in parenting blogs that are, it's difficult to describe it, but uber realistic. And I'm thinking about, in particular, one of the most famous bloggers to do this is the Unmumsy Mum, who she's now written a book, and actually her style is very much to not hide the realities of parenting. So very much she was one of the forerunners in saying, do you know what, parenting is very, very difficult. Some days you can sort of walk away from it thinking, why on earth did I ever decide to have children? Not every day is great. I absolutely love my children. I absolutely adore them. But, I'm going to stand up and say sometimes it's absolute hell. And if you feel like that, you're not alone. You've not quite gone down that road. I don't think you're quite realistic in the realities, but you're sort of with the middle ground. But there has been that rise in the uber realistic, hasn't there?
Absolutely. And as you say, I tend to focus more on the positives of parenting. I do acknowledge the fact that things aren't perfect, but that's not what I choose to focus on. I'm trying to focus on the positive things, the things that make me happy, the things that I want to look back on in later life. But you talk about Sarah, and she's a great example, and she has, I think it's something like 450,000 followers on Facebook now, because the stories she tells and are very, very real, and people share that with her. And I've met Sarah. I've had the fortune to meet Sarah a couple of times, and she's become quite a good friend. And I've interviewed her on the podcast that I do as well.
Yeah, I think as well that quite a lot of what she writes is very funny. It's very entertaining, simply because it's so, the opposite of what we usually read about on parenting blogs and that kind of thing. But the serious side to it is that she has helped a lot of people who may have found themselves struggling as a new parent. It is very difficult when you have young children. You do feel as though you're doing something wrong all of the time. You do question why you're not enjoying every second of every day. And certainly in her book, she acknowledges the number of people who've come forward and said to her, actually, thanks for saying this. Thanks for being that voice. When I, otherwise I would have felt as though I was getting nowhere and not really achieving much as a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And so much of Sarah's, I guess, the ethos behind her blog is that it's okay to fail occasionally.
Yeah.
And if you have more wins than losses, then you're doing okay.
Yeah. Coming up, we'll talk about the sort of reaction that you get to your blogs, because that is certainly something that would put me off writing a blog, I think, because whilst you must get a lot of positive reaction, sometimes there must be negative reaction in there as well. And we'll talk about how you deal with that. So more from Tim to come after The Cause. BBC Radio Berkshire playing The Cause and Dreams, 17 minutes past midday. Sarah Walker with you this afternoon. Tim Liu is my guest for this hour. He's from Thatcham. He's a father of 3, and he is bucking the blogging trend, certainly the parenting blogging trend, which over the last 5 years has soared in popularity. And mostly the parenting bloggers we tend to find are women, but you decided to start blogging on the subject of parenting 7 years ago when the eldest of your 3 children was not yet 1 even. Give us a rough insight into the sorts of things then that you blog about.
Okay, so Slouching Towards Thatcham is primarily a blog about fatherhood and my experiences as a dad. So, I do share a lot of my experiences with the kids, who, as I said, they provide a lot of material.
Yeah.
But yeah, I also write about things that related to my wider life. So, there's only so many times that you can write about the boys' obsession with the London Underground or with Minecraft. So I'll also comment on real world issues. So recently wrote some posts about the EU referendum.
Okay.
I'm a second generation immigrant, so some of the fallout from the Leave vote, obviously concerns me a great deal, particularly the impact that it might have on my kids. So I wrote a lot about that. But I write about all kinds of things. I guess my speciality is writing and singing parodies of well-known songs. So
now I have seen glimpses of this. So there's a parody of Bohemian Rhapsody doing the rounds from you, isn't there?
There is, yeah. That was my very first one last year, and some of my other efforts include a version of the 1980s soundtrack song Pretty in Pink, which was actually a piece of social commentary that I wrote about people's reaction to my eldest son's love of Pink when he was in preschool, so when he was age 3 or 4, and actually at the Brit Mums BML parent blogging conference a couple of weeks ago, I was asked to deliver one of the keynotes, and that's what I performed live in front of 500 people. So that was as thrilling as it was terrifying. But
wow.
I think it's probably safe to say that Simon Cowell won't be calling me anytime soon.
This is all quite at odds with the fact that you say, you are the wallflower. You walk into a room and you are not going to be the life and soul of the party, and there you are standing up in front of all of these people. And I suppose it's through blogging that's giving you, well, obviously that's the reason that you were there, but it's empowered you, I suppose, to be able to do that, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think it's opened up a lot of opportunities. And something like this comes along, it doesn't come along all the time. Yeah. So I'm very much of the mindset that when something like this comes along, you take that opportunity.
Yeah.
I was absolutely terrified beforehand, I have to admit, but it has opened up opportunities, such as this, opportunities to work with, sometimes with brands and sponsors and so on, and just generally having access to experiences that otherwise I might not have without the blog.
I think the idea of blogging appeals to a lot of people. It's kind of become the new version of I'd like to write a book, but simpler and easier, and everyone can do it, really. Everyone can start a blog if they want to. The problem is keeping it up, and the problem is doing it, particularly if you want to do it to reach a wider audience. Trying to get that wider audience is quite difficult to sustain. And I suppose the key to it is by constantly updating it, constantly writing new articles. That's the only way that you're going to keep the momentum going. So how often do you write a new post?
So I will write a post maybe 3 or 4 times a week.
Okay.
And it can be difficult to keep it going. I think, there's an initial flush of enthusiasm when you start a blog. And a lot of people do fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
But often, actually, certainly what I've found is it's all the extra benefits that you don't necessarily realise when you start the blog. It's the sense of community. It's making new friends. It's getting in touch with other people. It's having some of those additional experiences that you wouldn't otherwise have, that both encourage you to keep going and actually give you the additional material.
Does it sometimes feel, though, like you sort of sit down at night after you've had your tea, you're in that kind of post-tea slump in front of EastEnders, and you're thinking, I really can't be bothered to write a post tonight? Or have you sustained that momentum so you don't feel like that?
It happens. I think it happens to every blogger at some point in their writing. And I think you just learn to manage the peaks and troughs. So when I'm on a roll, I will write 3-4 posts in one go and have them all ready to go. And then at times I will take a few days off because the ideas have dried up, or actually I just need a break.
Yeah, of course.
And you learn to work that into your schedule, because I'm trying to fit blogging around a full-time job as well, and taking care of the kids and trying to spend enough time with them rather than just writing about them.
Yeah.
So you learn to kind of fit blogging in almost wherever you can in those little pockets of time that you have.
Now, you say that that sense of community is really appealing. The fact that people engage with you about the blog posts, and you start to have a conversation with a national or global audience, I suppose. Do you ever get negative comments? And if you do, how do you deal with that?
You do occasionally.
Yeah.
I think one of the things about the parent blogging community is that mostly the people who do respond to you do tend to be positive.
Yes.
But you do get disagreements sometimes. You get someone that disagrees with perhaps a certain way that you've disciplined your child, or the whole breast versus bottle debate, which goes on largely amongst mums. So as a dad, happily I can take a step back from that.
Yeah.
But I think you deal with negative comments the same way you do with positive comments.
Yeah.
I think people are entitled to their own views.
It's quite difficult though online, isn't it? Because people can be much nastier than they might be face to face because they can hide behind a computer screen.
Yeah. And you know, I as a rule, I tend to allow any comments on the blog. If there's any profanity, or if things start getting rude, then I will edit, or I will moderate accordingly. But on the whole, I'm quite happy to engage people who have different opinions. But I think as long as the commentary and the discussion is is civil, a disagreement is a disagreement. I've disagreed with many of my friends online who've commented on my posts, or when I've commented on theirs, and that's kind of okay. But as you say, online there is a danger of the discourse becoming quite negative sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. What makes a good blog, as far as you're concerned?
Above all, I think the content has to be relevant and engaging.
Yeah.
There is an element where I do write for myself, and I am my primary audience. But if you want to build an audience that goes beyond immediate family and friends and gives you a wider presence in the world, then it has to be content it has to be engaging. It has to be a little bit different. There are so many hundreds and thousands of parenting blogs out there, particularly written by mums, that it's really hard to stand out from the crowd.
Yeah. I suppose that there's that sort of sense of needing an authentic voice as well. It has to be the real you, doesn't it, when you're writing? Because I think it's probably unsustainable if it's not. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's really important to have that authentic voice, as you say. If you don't, I think it is very hard to sustain a voice that isn't truly yours.
Yeah, exactly.
I think sometimes it's very easy to unconsciously try to imitate another blogger who you really admire and try to adopt their voice. Whereas, really, as a writer, you should be focusing on your own voice, because nobody can write about yourself as well as you can.
Yeah, exactly. Your youngest is going to start school in September. How are you feeling about that looming phase of having no more preschoolers in the house?
It's a real milestone moment, isn't it?
Isn't it just?
Yeah, so it's the third time we'll have been through this, and there's one part of us that's mourning the loss of early childhood, as it were.
Preschool years, yeah.
But equally, at the same time, I have to admit that we're celebrating the fact that we only have to do one set of drop-offs and one set of pickups going forward.
At least for a few years, until the eldest goes to secondary school, and then goodness only knows.
Yeah. And then it starts all over again.
Yeah, you're all over the place. Really lovely to see you. Thank you very much for coming in to see us. If anyone wants to check out the blog, where can they find it? What's it called?
It's called Slouching Towards Thatcham, and you can find it at slouchingtowardsthatcham.com.
Lovely stuff. Tim, thank you, as I said, for coming in and seeing us.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
On BBC Radio Berkshire. Coming up then, the very latest Travel You Trust.
So, before we go, what else have we been up to recently? Vicky?
Do you know what? Recently I haven't been up to much, but we have got quite a lot coming up. The week after next, Ross and I are back off to Spain for our initial consultation for our next round of fertility treatment, our egg donation. So that's very positive stuff. But other than that, we're just looking at the end of term. I'm running, actually, there is something I've just remembered. I got my first paid photography job last week. I was very, very pleased. I'm over the moon about that.
Yeah, congratulations.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh, it was just for a local prom. It was one of the mums had seen my pictures, and she said, "Oh, could you come and take some photos of my daughter, or my niece, sorry, and her friend? They're off the prom and they're going in a tractor and trailer," which is obviously very fitting for Somerset. So they asked me to come and do some proper decent photography shots for them. So yeah, I'm very happy with that. So my next job is this week. I'm running the photo booth at my daughter's leavers party. So it's all photography related, which is brilliant. That's what I want to do.
Splendid. As for us, we're now in frantic preparation mode for our long weekend at Camp Festival next week. And as I think I mentioned last week, I'm not what you would call one of nature's natural outdoorsy types. But nonetheless, this will be a great experience for us to do with the kids. Plus, I don't have to actually worry about putting up the tent, as we've got a pre-pitched one waiting for us. Result. Now all we have to do is worry about sleeping bags and camping stoves and how many rolls of toilet paper we need, and whether it's possible to order breakfast room service. What do you mean there's no room service? And that's it for another episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, here's where you can find the two of us online.
So you'll find me at Verily Victoria Vocalises. URL is vevivos.com, and I'm on Twitter at Vic Welton.
And you can find me at slouchingtowardsthatcham.com and on Twitter at ThatchamDad. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and on Android devices via our website at meettheparentspodcast.com and also via a variety of podcasting apps. Do please give us a follow on Twitter at Parents Podcast and Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. So thank you for listening, and do please join us again next week. Good night.